not some person with an attitude and, you know, I got a degree, I'm cute, hire me, because that ain't gonna help, right? So, next thing you gotta do is, because you don't really know what's going on academically in this particular field, other than your personal beliefs, you have to survey what the literature is doing on it, right? And so, because you're starting in a general sense at this particular point. And that's what you use Gale Virtual. And keep in mind, you can also use Wikipedia, because your goal is to try to get the language that's needed to get into the literature in EBSCO, right? But Gale Virtual is the academic version of Wikipedia, so it's preferable. And when you go through and read some of the articles, guess what? You're going to see different areas that they get more specific, they talk about more of the details, and guess what? You'll kind of figure out where you need to go. And remember, when you get into EBSCO, you remember the boxes that David had in there, you know, under EBSCO? If you don't have the magic word, you're not going to get any results. So, and that's half of being an academic, is knowing the right kind of language to use to find the stuff that you need. So again, that's how come you got to find the magic word. So you remember here, is it leviosa or is it leviosa? It makes a difference. So when you're reading this stuff, what you're doing is you're not only reading for content and problems that you can solve, you're also looking at the language that they're using, because the language that they are using tends to be the ones that will be in the EBSCO box. Does that make sense? Okay. Then, since you know you got your topic, you got to decide what problem is there that I can try to resolve. Because research takes a lot of effort. You don't do it for no reason. And if you don't decide what problem to solve, your paper, you remember on Harry Potter, you got that spider with all the roller skates? That's what happens to your paper. But once you decide there's a problem you got to solve, guess what? Everything on that paper is going to be on that problem. And you're going to limit all the stuff that basically where you would be BSing, right? So you want to identify with the problem. You want to make sure it's an important problem. For example, I had one student, I said, how important is this problem? How many people does it affect the United States? And he was like, this is the most important problem ever. And he said, 3. Not that important if you're talking, now if you're one of the 3, I guess it's pretty important. But you see where I'm going, right? So it's got to be important. And then you got to remember, when you're doing this process, you're here to do analysis, which is very different than argument. Argument is, I think, I think, I think, I think, I think. But analysis is all about using evidence, seeing how all the things fit underneath the hood, see how things interact, right? Okay? So you're going to be doing analysis. Then you got to remember that this problem that you develop has to be something that's researchable. In other words, it's not something that would be pure arguments, because can an opinion be wrong?
Yes.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's valid. Everybody can have their own opinions, right, depending on their point of view.
True.
Nothing wrong with that. So argumentative type stuff is hard to research. I'm not saying it's impossible, but so what I tell you here is try to avoid a controversial topic, because most folks, when they start a controversial topic, what they do is they go down the argument path. And what happens if you turn in an argument paper instead of an analysis paper? What happens to your grade? Right? So again, you want to be able to have this researchable. Okay. And then you want to make sure you're realistic about this problem, because one of the other problems with academia is we like living in the ideal world. And if you notice, the real world is not the same as that ideal world. It's much different, right? Which means you got to be a little bit more practical. Like if you're a nurse, you know when you're going to go into nursing, you know this is going to affect you. So you're not looking at the pie in the sky stuff. You're looking at the down and dirty type stuff, right? So it's real world. And then once you decide what that problem is, this helps you determine the variables that you're going to actually be studying, right? Because the next step is you want to develop a hypothesis. Now, this is your best guess on what you think you're going to find, but a hypothesis is not the purpose of your paper. The hypothesis, what scientific finding do you think you're going to have? Like if I'm doing a global warming paper, I would say so, the hypothesis of this paper is that global warming is caused by carbon dioxide fossil fuel emissions. Bang. You may be right, you may be wrong, you don't know. Now unfortunately in academia, what they always do is because academics hate being wrong. So what they always do, they do all this research and then they always go back and rewrite the introduction so that they're right all along. And so there's actually a lack of good scientific research of things that people do wrong. So there's a new journal called the Journal of Falsification, for example. So again, it is not the purpose, and it is your best guess, because you don't know what's going to actually happen. Now, what I like is when people actually state what their initial hypothesis really was, and in the conclusion, the initial hypothesis of this paper was incorrect. And I think that person got stones, right? That's how come I like Stephen Hawking. Was one of the few scientists that had enough stones to falsify the thing that made him famous. How many people could do that? Again, that's a nice thing about Hawking. And we are diminished because he passed on not too long ago. Now, one of the other things that I can't prepare you through this process, and keep in mind, is at any point you can be knocked back to square one. Hence the, don't! Mufasa, do it again! Right? Or, squirrel! Right? Because sometimes you'll be reading something and you forget what you're writing. You'll be somewhere else, right?
Oh, yeah.
And all of this is fit within this analysis zone, which is a different kind of place, right? Because here you're starting to use, you're trying to find the truth. And the truth does not care what you think of it, right?
Right.
So you got to go where it is. And if it's uncomfortable, guess what? You're going to have to deal with it. But you have to have the courage to talk about it. You have to use due diligence. In other words, you got to work for it. You know, how about Klingon style, right? Like the Klingons who fight, you got to fight with this stuff. Because being passive, which basically means I'm right all along, right? You don't want to do that. You want to use logic, right? Again, which is important. And then again, some of the ideas from Bogason, things like falsification, counterfactual analysis, and so forth. You're using higher order thinking. In other words, guess what? It takes time to get into this zone. So in other words, when you're inside BL Virtual, you're doing all this stuff, you should expect it to take a few hours, because that's just the nature of the beast. You're trying to be objective, but you recognize, start from, hey, I'm biased. I have a dog in that hunt. What's my bias? Once you identify your bias, then you're a little bit freer to say, I could be wrong, right? What if my belief is wrong? Right? That's, again, why focusing is so important. Then, we don't talk about this enough in academia, but creativity and out-of-the-box thinking is essential. It really is. Scientists hate those terms, but again, if you do the same thing that everybody else does, you're going to have the same results, nothing extraordinary. We have so many problems that we really have to solve that we need better researchers. So you need to foster that ability in yourself. Now, when you're taking tests for your professor, give them exactly what they want. Don't do this, right? But once you get to the higher levels, if you really want to make a difference, this is where you make it, is by having that ability. Because most folks, like I said, 3%, they basically just follow the rest of it like lemmings over the cliff type stuff, right? So again, out-of-the-box thinking. Now, Einstein, you remember what I talked about on day one? He did not like relativity. God does not play dice. But Einstein specifically stated, when you're doing science, it doesn't matter what you think or feel. You got to take the arguments and see where they go. And he said that if he followed his natural instincts, God doesn't play dice, he would have never discovered relativity. So again, that ability to get outside of you, it doesn't always have to be about you, right? It leads to new thoughts, and it frees you in so many different ways. And again, you're using evidence, trying to be practical about the real world. The evidence is EBSCO database. Right? Does that make sense? And again, we'll talk more about that shortly. So this is kind of the main research zone up here, but you see what you're trying to do. You're trying to actually find something that's useful and true, and the end goal is to solve the problem. You start with the problem. It just makes sense that you solve the problem, right, if you can. Now, keep in mind, I don't grade you on whether your solution is right or wrong. That's not my purpose. I'm teaching you a process. So what happens after this class, if somebody gives you a blank paper and says, write a dissertation, you're going to know step by step what to do, and you won't freak out. And I have students all the time. In fact, I just got an email from the last student, still grading his final papers and stuff. I just got hit with all these analysis papers. I'm confident I can fly this plane, and everybody else is freaking out. Right? So again, this will help you. So once you come up with your hypothesis statement, from that hypothesis, you just ask yourself a basic question. Keep in mind that you've read, you surveyed Gale to get a feeling for what the other folks are saying, right? And just say, what are the 3 things that I need to know to actually resolve this problem? And just be practical. You just write them down, right? That becomes your research questions, which guides you towards the rest of the paper. Because what you can do is you can use these research questions to find new search terms in EBSCO. For example, in most cases what you want to do is you want to find one, like if I'm doing the global warming, right? I will do one search that will say global warming. Actually, I would change it to climate change because global warming is a little bit biased in one way or another, right? And literature review. Because I want to find one article that's deep that tells me the big picture stuff, right? So the ideas that I need to know. But the next three, because keep in mind, you survey thing, part of climate change would be solar output, transoceanic current. You know, there's a lot of factors. And think about it this way. What was the population of the planet Earth around 1970? About 4 billion, we're up about 8. So what's the solution? Kill people, right? Because what do you breathe out, right? So again, we don't hear about these type of questions. So what you're doing, and even the question, think about it this way. If carbon dioxide is the problem, is there a solution? And guess what? There's a bunch of solutions that are pretty cheap. We can even pump it back into the ground. Do you hear about this stuff? Again, this is out-of-the-box thinking. You're looking at the problem. But again, what you'll do is, for the next, you'll pick the top 3 things that you think are the most important, like transoceanic current is historically how come we had the frozen earth and so forth, so that's the general geologist solution to the problem. So I would say transoceanic current, and climate change for one search. The next one would be carbon dioxide concentration and global warming, right? Because what they don't tell you, they tend to assume that the more carbon dioxide, the more warming. When they actually measure, it goes up to a certain point and then it starts going down. So there's even distortions there. But you see what I'm saying? So what you're doing is from these research questions, you get new search terms for EBSCO so that by the time you have to actually start talking about this, you'll actually have a bunch of stuff for your paper. Does that make sense? As opposed to what most people do is they like climate change, pick the first 4 papers, done. And they don't even look at what's in it, right? And that's how come it takes a lot of time to find your first articles, because, you know, let's face it, sometimes the first couple you pick, they may not be so good. Another point is if it's too hard for you, you read it, it's too dense, don't beat yourself up. Throw that article out and find another one that's easier. Does that make sense? Because I have had students that, you know, I love physics just like the next person, but if it's above your head, don't burn your head trying to think about it like that, right? So again, make sure it matches your ability, because again, I'm trying to show you the process. Now from those research questions, again, you got and keep in mind, from those research questions, you might find out that I was asking the wrong question. Maybe it isn't carbon dioxide. Like, what do we do to all our houses? We put tar paper on them? What about all these roads? You guys all been in forests. What's the difference in temperature when you're in a forest and on a highway? One's hot. But again, we don't talk about those kind of things, right? So again, now you set up to decide what approach to the problem will be the best one to solve the problem. And in the handouts for global warming, I gave you the examples, right? I gave you an example for each. But what you do is say, which one of these will give me the best chance of solving the problem as I saw fit? For example, one way, if I'm going to talk about climate change, I need to understand the process, right? Because if we don't understand the process, how are we going to actually go towards the solutions? Or I may decide I need to go strictly after cause and effect. If it's just carbon dioxide, what's the effect of carbon dioxide on temperature? You can isolate that, right? And there's a lot of other ways. And again, you could do a classification, like, say for example, maybe it's not carbon dioxide, maybe it's actually a whole range of problems that, like environmental issues, right? You know, so that's the possibility. So you decide this based on your problem, and you're free in that respect. Okay, so now you decide which analytical approach. Now you know exactly what you need to find in EBSCO. If you're doing a cause and effect paper, I need to find the causes or effects, because with cause and effect you only have to do half, you don't have to do them both. And we'll talk more about these each class so it'll become easier to digest what they are. So EBSCO is what you're doing. This is the reality zone. Because many of us want to do papers on a bunch of things, but until you start finding literature on them, you don't know where you're going to end up. So at this stage, many people end up changing their topic. And usually it's just something like they're reading it, squirrel, and they forget they forget all about climate change, and they found something. My child has autism, I want to do this. That's what I can't protect you from, right? You have to realize that sometimes you're going to get knocked back, and sometimes it's going to be in the last week of the class. And I understand that process. That's normal. So be prepared for it. So you collect your data in EBSCO. Again, you're going to look for your peer-reviewed articles. That's a minimum. And again, wean yourself from the Google. You're here to learn about EBSCO. Like I said, EBSCO is over $1 million a year, so use it to your advantage. This is the academic stuff. In an academic paper, you do not discuss common popular knowledge, which is that folk knowledge, what people on the street. You're here to talk about the higher order stuff that has evidence, which is what's different than when you would write your papers in the past, right? So, again, 4 peer-reviewed articles is the minimum. And then when you read those articles, you develop themes from those articles. You get themes from the authors, right? And those actually help decide how to write the structure of your paper. I'm going to teach you an annotated bibliography. Now what that is, that's going to be for week 2. An annotated bibliography is actually a tool for writing papers. Most people don't view it like this, right? And so what you do is you're going to summarize 3 of your 4 articles, because I can get what I need from that. And you're going to do a little bit of analysis on it. And then what's nice is, has anybody here had like 10 articles and you're trying to figure out what to write on, and it's just like all over? And there's no way you can get that much in your head. Now what happens is with an annotated bibliography, it's 1 page only per article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the themes, I'm going to read what you told me was there, and then I'm going to set them on the table, and from the helicopter I'm going to say, this to me are the 3 most important themes that the literature's talking about. And guess what? That just defines the structure of your paper. Because in this paper you're going to have an abstract, which is kind of like an overall summary. You're going to have an introduction section. You're going to have a history of the problem section. You're going to have a literature review section, which is where you're reporting the evidence. You're going to have a discussion section, which is you judging that evidence. And you're going to have a conclusion, because in academic writing, you're not free to write whatever you want. In academic writing, you are required to write certain sections, and in each section, certain information is required. And once you deliver it, guess what? You shut up and you move on, you're done. You don't keep talking about stuff if you already gave them what they need. So you collect the data, and from that you'll decide, this is the 3 themes that the literature taught. Like, for example, in the global warming, it could be carbon dioxide is the one that's mentioned the most. I'll use that as the first theme. The next one I will talk about maybe the solar output, because we're at a solar minimum. There's a bunch of other stuff going on there. And the third one you could pick, maybe it'll be the transoceanic current. It depends, but you pick that based on the evidence and your best judgments, right? Because this is part you. And then what will happen is those will become headings underneath your literature. So your literature review will be like a level 1 heading, like a major heading, and you'll have each of these subheadings. And guess what? Those subheadings, those are the same search terms that you can use to pull the data that you need. So instead of just blanketing, just pulling climate change and praying that you're going to find the right, you will say climate change and carbon dioxide, and you will have what you need. So in other words, you'll have enough stuff to write the paper. For the discussion section, this is the most important part of the paper. This is you analyzing this idea. Uses same exact structure as you did in the literature review, and this is common practice. They call it a parallel structure. And the reason is, you already said that according to the literature, these are the 3 most important ideas. If that is true, why aren't you talking about it? So guess what? Under literature review and under discussion, you have the same 3 headings. The first one, your Clark Kent Ace reporter. So-and-so said, so-and-so said, so-and-so said, right? But in that discussion section, you put on the judge robes, and you're Judge Judy or Malthus, or pick your favorite judge. Because again, now you're not some person with street knowledge. In theory, you are a subject matter expert. See the difference? Because now you're familiar with the literature. So you collect the data, then you do your analysis, right? And again, the purpose of doing this analysis, so you do analyze the overall situation, but the whole purpose here is to help find solutions to the problem. Like, for example, I would talk about, are there ways to mitigate the effects of carbon dioxide output on climate change? And like I said, there are. Sometimes there's some chemicals we can spray in the atmosphere. 2, we could actually pump some of that stuff in the ground, right? Or we can regulate them, which is what the typical approach is, by saying, you can't put out carbon, you gotta put all these scrubbers and stuff like this. And but you see what I'm saying. You come up with very specific solutions, so that's your analysis. But again, be pragmatic and do respect diverse views. Because what you don't want to do is only tell one side of the story. You want to be balanced. So like, on one hand, Smith argues that climate change cannot be fixed, blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, so-and-so says it can, blah, blah. See the difference? And again, that's being balanced, because you're required to be a neutral person in this argument. You can still come to a conclusion, but by being neutral, what will happen is people will actually read what you wrote. Because what happens if you read a paper and somebody hits you with a brick in the face? Are you going to read it? No. And what if that brick hits your teacher in the face? Right? That you're doomed, right? So again, this stuff is really important. So you write your analysis, and again, remember that this does affect real people when your solutions, and we don't talk about that enough, but guess what? Some people don't want to be controlled, right? But you don't understand, I love my Hummer, right? And you got to think about kind of stuff like that. And you have the ability to agree or disagree with what the research says too, which is part of that out-of-the-box thinking, asking new questions. You remember, the quality of the questions you ask predetermines the answers that you will get and their quality. Does that make sense? If you just ask what everybody else asks, again, you're going to get the same old results. There's nothing there. There's no contribution there. But if you can think out of the box, again, it really helps your cause. Now, from all this stuff, now you write your solution, and guess what? You solve it. Now, for example, policies wonks, what they do is they actually go, and you can pick your favorite president. Say, President Obama, I hear you care about blah, blah, blah. And I think that, and this is how it works in the real world. I said, I've seen research on this, and this researcher came up with a 3-point plan on how we can solve it. And basically, they would say, this is how, and you could say Trump, whoever it is, and basically they'll go through and say, you know what, that sounds pretty good. Why don't you bring that to the lawyers and have them turn that into a piece of legislation, let's make it happen. But if you walk into President Trump's office or President Obama's office and say, people should know more. What is he going to say? Get out of my office. You didn't tell me anything helpful, right? So what you want to do is you want to come up with a very specific 3-point plan, ideally finding a solution for each of your major themes. Does that make sense? So what will happen is when, and you won't give it all away at the beginning, you'll just kind of hint, you're going to force everybody to read, you start with the problem, and you solve it. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. And again, most people don't write papers this way. Basically, they just kind of follow the wind, whichever way it goes, and they just kind of put a bunch of BS in there, and it doesn't mean, and I'll put a big old X through a whole paragraph, I'll say, this says nothing. Translation, BS, right? So again, once you understand what the structure is, what those sections are supposed to do, it will really help you. The other reason that I do this is, can you guys read everything?
No.
The biggest problem for researchers right now is you can't read everything. What that means is what you do read has to be the best, or you have to know exactly where to look for specific information, right? And since this is all APA, I didn't make this up, right? This is standard form, and this is how come American research is so popular. Like if I need to know something about some of the statistical information about global warming, I know from experience it's going to be in the history of the problem section. So guess what? If you need that information, you don't have to read whole articles. You just go to the section you know where your information is. Does that make sense? Because what I made a mistake is, old school, I started each article from the beginning to the end.
Oh, wow.
And how much time did I waste?
Lots.
A bunch. Because a lot of that stuff wasn't even relevant, right? So again, by learning the structure of the paper, by writing it like this, it's going to save you lots of time. And I want you to just answer honestly. If you turn in a paper that wasn't written like this, and you compare to yourself turning a paper written like this, which one's going to get the better grade?
This one?
By far. Because they're going to go, wow. And that's what I want them to do. Is this pretty understandable?
Yeah.
Okay. So for Sunday, and again, don't make this harder than it has to be. Think about a general subject area that you care about. You know, something that's going to be important to you and useful. Realizing that it may change. I don't hold anything in stone. And so, and this is actually in the syllabus, I forget which page. Basically just email me at jameslotek@gmail.com, because I hate the end-use stuff that gets buried down. I don't see when your emails are coming in, so always email me at my jameslotek@gmail.com. You don't have to make an attachment. Just put the numbers there, and all this is in the syllabus with the instructions, so you don't have to write it down if you don't want to, right? But put your name, because some of your emails addresses don't have your name in it, and I kind of need to know who you are, right, for grading purposes. Put the general subject and a little short history of why it's important. Then try to specify that topic a little bit more detail. Discuss why is this important to you. Like, if, for example, if you have a child with autism, Isn't that something that you'd want to say, hey, I need to determine what's the best treatment for my son or daughter, right? But you want to identify what that problem is that you're trying to solve, talk about the importance, discuss what kind of evidence that you think you're going to need. Are you going to need case studies? Are you going to need statistics, that kind of stuff? And then what are your research questions? What do you need to know to solve the problem? Guess at the search terms that you're going to need. Decide which analytical approach you're going to use. And then, of course, come up with your initial hypothesis. What do you expect to conclude? In other words, if you're doing a cause and effect, what do you expect the real cause to be type of stuff? Is that helpful? And again, what's going to happen, just email it to me. And as long as it's Monday morning, I start at 7 o'clock. Don't stay up to 3 in the morning. You know, just email me first thing Monday morning. I'm good with that. Just email to me, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my magic, and I'm going to go through that, and I'm going to turn something out to you on Monday to help you get a little bit more specified into your paper subjects. Does that make sense? So again, because you're not alone in this process, I'm going to be teaching it along with you. And then what's going to happen, I'm going to give you the proper title for your paper. I'm going to give you the magic words to do your search, to find your articles for next week. Next week, when you do your annotated bibliographies, I'm going to go through that product. And I'm going to actually go through what you tell me, and I'm going to come up with the themes for your paper. The reason that I do this is because I can tell you this till I'm blue in the face. And what will happen is it goes blah, 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 beer. Right? But once I actually show you on your own paper how you pull out these ideas, you go like, ah, I see how he did that. Now you can do it. Does that make sense? So that's how come I do this process. Now keep in mind with the introduction, even if you say, I'm going to send an email, I don't care about this dang paper, I ain't going to write nothing. 5 points, I gave you that, I don't care. Right? But again, the more you give me, the better I can do. I do grade the annotated bibliography next week. It's 15 points, 5 per article, and so forth. Right? And we'll talk about more stuff later. Any questions? You guys have been great. Thanks for coming out. I will see you on Monday.
Awesome.
And have fun thinking about your topic.